honest, this plot, based on first impressions, looks absolutely perfect. It's got a really nice piece of commercial property which is already in existence. We could easily get a change of use application submitted to Wychavon Council to try and turn that piece of property into our African themed cafe and also our gift shop ready for the development of the zoo. The other great thing about this site is it already has car parking provision for around 60 cars, and there is obviously room for expansion to welcome the number of guests that we're hoping to bring onto our site. The land is also split up into 3 or 4 sort of sub-parcels, and if we were to focus on the development of what I'm going to call field number 1, we could actually convert that into our African savanna walkthrough area pretty quickly. We could get things like zebras and meerkats, lemurs, Red River hogs on site and fully immerse our guests in that safari experience. The other great thing about this site is the accessibility. So it's actually on the corner of a junction where the A road meets the B road. So it's used to handling traffic already. To be honest, there's excess capacity on those roads already, so we could easily accommodate more vehicles without causing too much unnecessary traffic disruption during the construction process. And also, when the site's up and running, there shouldn't be any traffic overflows into the local community. The other great thing about this site is an ecological assessment has actually been done relatively recently, and there are no sort of protected species on the site at this point in time, with the exception of bats. But on a recent planning application on this site, the ecological consultant basically said that the bats could be accommodated for by providing bat housing within an existing part of the plot. And obviously what we have to remember is we're not turning this site into hundreds of new homes. Actually, we're a wildlife park. So something that's really important for me is conserving the existing nature and the existing wildlife on site, enhancing the quality of the habitat provided for the local wildlife. We're not here to rip the whole thing up with JCBs. Actually, we're looking to carefully design a landscape which can obviously exhibit our exotic animals and support local wildlife as well. So with every site we've looked at so far around the country, it's been an existing animal attraction, so a petting farm, a zoo, a wildlife park, or it's been a garden centre which could be converted into a zoo. And all of these sites we've looked at have a really secure perimeter fence. What you can see here is that this site is just surrounded by native tree species and natural hedgerow. So what we need to do now is go home and look at the costings of installing a perimeter fence, which obviously keeps unwanted guests out during the night and outside of our operating hours, but also, most importantly, keeps the animals on site every day of every week of the entire year. So the vision that we have is very much along the lines of a walk through safari. So if you can imagine like really big wide paths here, and then the guests are basically walking through the middle of the enclosure. So we'd have standoff barriers on either side of the path. You'd have a zebra to the right, an ostrich to the left, and then in between the standoff barriers and the enclosure fencing, it would be well planted to give that immersive savanna feel. So getting big plush grasses to make it feel like the guests really are walking through the heart of Africa. We've done the maths and I've looked at the cost of the perimeter fencing. One of the most unusual things about this site is that it's not already a zoo. Everywhere I've looked in the country so far, I've been looking for an existing tourist attraction to convert into a zoo, or I've been looking at zoological collections or wildlife parks which are already up and running. Whereas with the site we're looking at in Worcestershire, we'd need to establish a lot of the basic infrastructure. So the initial cost outlay is more significant. So what I've done is essentially use the last 3 years of research to develop the costings for the project. And we've got 3 cash flow forecasts which basically set out what would happen in the best case scenario, the most likely scenario, and also in the worst case scenario. So in our best case scenario projections, we'd have people queuing to get in on day one. They really buy into my story and the vision. And then with that, we make a significant amount of revenue which we can continually reinvest to develop other areas of the park. So maybe bringing a South American area, maybe bringing through more walkthrough experiences to really put guests amongst the wildlife and fully immerse them in the experience. We then have a most likely scenario and looking at other attractions of a similar size. We bring in around 100,000 visitors in the first year because of local community interest, and in that business plan and in that cash flow forecast, we still make a really good amount of revenue which can be reinvested to develop the park. We've also done a worst case scenario cash flow forecast where it rains every single day of the year and we have 10 visitors walking around and nobody wants to come out because it's the worst weather in centuries. Obviously that's unlikely to happen, but I suppose anything could happen. And even on that model, we are able to make revenue which can be reinvested into the development of the park for hopefully a sunnier year in year 2. We've already spoke to a couple of commercial banks and spoke to them about the project. What we're currently doing right now is just developing the business plan. So I'm trying to get 28 years of business planning in my mind onto paper so that the banks can completely understand what they're going to be supporting. I've also spoken to some credit brokers and to the startup loans company, and although they appreciate the cash flow forecast, they want the full written business plan. So we're currently working on that right now, and hopefully in the next few weeks we can see whether the project is completely viable. What I have realised though is in order to pay those initial startup costs associated with this site, I am going to have to sell my home. I haven't actually told anybody that yet, but I've got a local property expert coming around next week to do a full valuation, and hopefully we can get that house on the market as soon as possible, and hopefully get a really quick sale. But you never know, obviously with selling housing, how long it will take. It could take months, could take a week, could take a day, who knows. But hopefully it will sell pretty quickly, releasing the funds to really get the project moving and hopefully make this site a reality. So as part of the business plan, we've had to obviously identify the name of the company. We've set up a limited company as well, and we've done a lot of brainstorming. I don't know why I'm saying we already, because it's basically just me at this stage. But with the zoo, I want to move away from that word zoo because a lot of people have negative connotations of animals, especially monkeys and primates behind bars, and that's not the experience that I want to create. I want to create a wildlife park, a zoological collection which does loads of work for conservation partners out in the wild and makes a real meaningful difference to the planet. So in our brainstorming, we've looked at names like zoo gardens, we've looked at names associated with the term wildlife park, we've looked at things like conservation centre, so trying to get away from the word zoo. We've also thought about the local area and the nearest town. So the nearest town to this site is Redditch. It's also relatively close to Stratford-upon-Avon, which is about 15 minutes away, but it's probably too far away to associate with that town. But we are proud of the fact that it is in Worcestershire, so we've looked at the county name as well. But when we've been doing our brainstorming, we've come up with Heart of England, because this site really is bang in the middle of the country. And there's a lot of other businesses and attractions in the local area which use that brand name. And we think that we can have positive benefits for them in terms of us being associated with that term Heart of England. And obviously it would be beneficial for us to have a brand name which is already associated with so many positive connotations. So the name we've decided is Heart of England Wildlife Park. And I'm currently just waiting for the creative design agency to get back to me with our logo. And honestly, I can't wait, because it will feel like once we have a logo, the project feels very real, and we can move forward obviously into our next stage of developing the whole project. So we've currently got a creative design agency turning our logo concept into a reality, and they're going to hopefully submit us the file in the near future with the logo on. I genuinely feel like now we've got the brand name, Heart of England Wildlife Park, and we're going to have the logo imminently. we can really move forward with the next stage of the project and turn what was my dream and has been for the last 28 years into a reality. Hi Hugh, how are you? Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah, thank you for taking the time to meet with me today, obviously to discuss our fencing requirements. I have received your brochure in the post, and I know obviously you're one of the industry experts when it comes to zoo perimeter fencing. So I'll give you a bit of an overview about our project. We're looking at a site which is about 30 acres in Worcestershire. At the moment it isn't a zoological collection, so we're going to need a full perimeter fence establishing around the outside. And I'd be interested to hear about what your recommendations would be for the type of fencing that we require, but also giving us some advice in terms of planning, so when we work closely with the council we can get it all put through as quickly as possible. I've just received the logo back from the design agency. They did give me a few different options, but I really loved this concept. Everything about it, from my favourite animals being showcased within the design, to the rainbow which is in the background giving the sign of hope, but also the rainbow also acts as the sunset, and it just gives that vibe of a walk through savannah safari during the sunset, and it really just screams out wildlife park rather than zoo. And I love the trees and the grasses which are fully incorporated into the logo design, and it gets us away from that negative connotation of the word zoo and that idea of a concrete jungle, a zoo with bars where it doesn't look particularly pleasing. We want this to be a large, spacious, open zoo, wildlife park which people can walk through and feel fully immersed in the animal's environment. Personally, I can imagine this logo on mugs, magnets, t-shirts, and hopefully it will become a brand and a logo which is instantly recognisable within the local community and further afield as well. So we're 2 weeks into the government-imposed lockdown in response to the coronavirus pandemic. I've just received this amazing jumper in the post, which has got the Heart of England Wildlife Park branding on it. I'm not sure about the colour. I was thinking grey more than black, but I think I'm going to order another one in black just to compare the two different options. So because of the pandemic and obviously the understandable need for the commercial banks to support their existing customers, Lloyds have actually stopped all new applications for business bank accounts, but we're still working with some commercial banks to try and access the funds to get this project off the ground. Just before lockdown, we'd held really promising talks with the commercial banks who seemed keen to support the project, especially given the fact that I was selling my house to create a significant reserve of funds to actually help develop the project. I've also held conversations with the Startup Loans Company and other credit brokers and received some fantastic reports and feedback. They actually said that my business plan was one of the most detailed business plans I'd ever seen, so thankfully my 6 years working as an economics and business and accounting teacher hasn't gone to waste. And they were also really impressed with the cash flow forecast, but they said it was too detailed. Maybe my research of looking at companies' house accounts for similar institutions and also reading annual reports for some of the charitable zoos, was providing too much detail for ordinary banks to understand. So I'd even gone as far as looking at the probability of animals needing vet treatment and needing post-mortem fees should any animals unfortunately die, which does inevitably happen in a zoo. And they said just collate all those costs together and just put them under a heading of animal care. But obviously I think the fact that I could provide such insight into the individual costs of running a zoo really showed them that I know what I'm talking about. This isn't just a pipe dream. Actually, this has the potential to become a significant reality, and we do have the ability to hopefully open our gates to guests by Easter 2021. I suppose one of the strangest things at the moment is that we can't leave the house, so I haven't seen my family, I haven't been able to go back to the site. So rather than proceeding with the business plan in terms of going from A to B to C, and by that I mean building a zoo, then developing the marketing campaign, then developing an online shop or online profile, we're actually having to go from B to C to A. So we're developing the marketing right now, the logo, the website. I'm working on that currently. Then I'm going to develop the online shop. And actually one of the last parts of the process will be building the physical wildlife park. And hopefully, the lockdown will be over soon, cases will start going down, and we'll be able to get back outside and start planning the zoo in more detail. So I'm just finding some time to unwind after a crazy 3 weeks. 3 weeks ago I was looking at a site in North Devon as the potential place to site the zoo, and now it seems to be full steam ahead on a plot literally on my doorstep within 5 miles of my home. I had inquired about getting the house put on the market. I had the initial valuation done, but because of lockdown, unfortunately, it hasn't been able to go on the market just yet. We're proceeding regardless. We're getting all the plans, drawn up. I'm looking at the logistics, the practicalities. But now my main focus is, thinking about how we can turn essentially what's a concept into a real life wildlife park, which hopefully can be up and running as soon as possible and welcoming guests through the door by Easter next year.